Imagine a sky filled not with bombs or bullets, but with lifelines, thin strands of wire unspooling from the bellies of C-47 aircraft, silently stitching armies together across Europe. This little-known operation during World War II gave soldiers the one thing they desperately needed more than firepower: communication. Before we journey into this remarkable story of innovation, teamwork, and resilience, take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Join our community where history is told with care, respect, and a human touch. Together, let's preserve the voices and forgotten details of the past for generations to come. When we think about World War II, we often imagine tanks rumbling across muddy fields, planes dueling high above the clouds, and infantry charging into fortified positions. Rarely, though, do we pause to think about something far quieter but equally decisive: communication. A war cannot be fought in silence. Commanders need to speak to their troops. Field units need to coordinate attacks. Artillery batteries need precise instructions. And scattered divisions across vast landscapes need to remain connected. Without communication, even the most powerful army risks becoming disorganized, vulnerable, and ineffective. During the European campaigns of 1944 and 1945, one technology stood above all others in maintaining reliable battlefield communication: field telephone wires. And yet, the method by which those wires were laid is a story most people have never heard. It is a story of ingenuity, teamwork, and a quiet but essential sacrifice. Between June 1944 and May 1945, as Allied forces pushed from the beaches of Normandy into the heart of Germany, more than 2 million miles of wire were laid, an astonishing average of over 6,000 miles per day. These weren't just wires. They were the lifelines of freedom. At first glance, you might wonder, why go to such lengths to lay wire in a war that already had radios? The answer is both practical and sobering. Radios in the 1940s were bulky, unreliable, and often susceptible to interference. Enemy forces could listen in, jam frequencies, or triangulate the source of radio transmissions, exposing troops to deadly artillery strikes. Radios were useful for mobile units, but they were far from secure. Wired telephones, on the other hand, offered something radios could not: clarity and privacy. Messages traveled directly from point to point, shielded from prying ears. They were not easily intercepted, and once established, they offered uninterrupted communication even under the harshest battlefield conditions. But how could millions of miles of wire be laid in such a short time, across forests, rivers, ruined towns, and open battlefields? This was the challenge the Allied Signal Corps faced, and their solution would become one of the quiet triumphs of military ingenuity. Enter the C-47 Skytrain, a rugged transport aircraft, already famous for dropping paratroopers on D-Day and towing gliders across Europe. This reliable workhorse of the skies was about to take on another unusual role: aerial wire laying. Here's how it worked. A giant spool of communication wire was loaded into the aircraft. One end was secured to the ground, perhaps at a command post, a telephone exchange, or a forward operating base. As the plane lifted off and flew across the battlefield, the wire unfurled from the spool behind it, snaking down to the earth and stretching across fields and forests. From above, it must have looked almost poetic, a silver bird trailing a lifeline across the torn landscapes of war. Each mission connected divisions, corps, and sometimes even entire armies. This method was efficient. What might take days for ground crews to accomplish by hand could be done in mere hours from the sky. And in war, hours often meant the difference between life and death. Let us pause for a moment on the numbers because they deserve reflection. Over 11 months of major ground operations in Europe, Allied forces laid more than 2 million miles of communication wire. That is enough to circle the Earth at the equator over 80 times. On an average day, more than 6,000 miles of wire were laid. Imagine stretching a cable from New York City to Los Angeles every single day for nearly a year, and then doing it again and again without pause. Behind each mile of wire was labor, danger, and dedication. Signal Corps soldiers risked enemy fire, worked through mud and snow, and often laid wire under cover of night. The C-47 aerial wire-laying missions reduced some of that burden, but ground crews still had to connect, repair, and maintain the network tirelessly. It was an invisible war, fought not with rifles but with reels of copper. Consider the perspective of a young Signal Corps soldier. He might have landed in Normandy in June 1944, carrying not just a rifle but also reels of heavy wire. His mission was not to storm bunkers but to string cables through hedgerows, over streams and into foxholes. He would crawl through mud while artillery thundered above, stretching wire inch by inch. If the wire was cut by shellfire, a common occurrence, he had to brave the battlefield again to find the break and repair it. Many of these soldiers worked without recognition, their names lost to history, yet their work was as vital as any tank crew or infantry squad. From the sky, C-47 pilots carried equal responsibility. Flying low and steady, they risked enemy anti-aircraft fire to ensure that the wire paid out smoothly. Any snag or break could ruin the entire mission. It was delicate work performed under the harshest of conditions. One veteran described watching the wire spill out like a silver ribbon, disappearing into the fields below. He recalled thinking, "This isn't just wire. This is a voice. This is hope traveling down to the men who need it." The wire network was vast and complex, almost like the nervous system of a living body. Central exchanges acted like brains, processing calls and directing them where they needed to go. Forward operating bases functioned like sensory nerves, transmitting urgent signals back to headquarters. Artillery units received firing coordinates. Infantry received new orders. Medical teams requested evacuations. Every time a phone rang in a muddy foxhole, it was because somewhere, someone had laid a wire, perhaps by foot, perhaps by truck, or perhaps from a C-47 high above. The network allowed generals like Eisenhower, Bradley, and Patton to coordinate sweeping maneuvers across continents. Without it, the carefully planned choreography of the European campaign would have collapsed into chaos. Beyond the strategy and numbers lies something even more profound. Those wires carried not only orders but also reassurance. A commander could check in with his units. Soldiers could hear familiar voices across the line. In a world of uncertainty and danger, that connection meant everything. Imagine being a young soldier, deep in the Ardennes during the bitter winter of 1944. Snow falls heavily, the enemy presses hard and morale sinks. Then a field phone rings. On the other end, a commanding voice gives clear orders, encouragement, and a promise of reinforcements. That voice travels down a copper thread unspooled from the sky, keeping despair at bay. The war was not only fought with bullets, it was fought with voices traveling down lines, carrying courage across impossible distances. History tends to spotlight generals, politicians, and great battles. But the story of aerial wire laying belongs to the Signal Corps, a branch that worked in shadows yet illuminated the path to victory. They were not seeking glory. Many of them never fired a shot. Yet they gave the armies their ears and their tongues. They stitched the front lines to the rear, the soldier to his commander, the artillery gunner to his target. Their sacrifice was quiet but immense, and for many veterans who survived, they looked back with pride, knowing that without their work, the war could not have been won. After the war, as technology advanced, radios improved in the practice of laying millions of miles of field. Wire faded into history. Satellites, secure radio systems, and digital communication replaced the copper threads that once covered Europe. But the legacy remains. The ingenuity shown by the Signal Corps and the C-47 crews set a precedent for solving seemingly impossible logistical challenges. They reminded the world that wars are not won by brute force alone, but also by creativity, adaptability, and the quiet determination of those who keep the lines open. Even today, military communication networks trace their roots back to those miles of wire, and to the men who risked everything to lay them. When we look back at World War II, let us remember not only the tanks, planes and ships, but also the wires. Let us honor the pilots who flew the C-47s with reels of cable, and the Signal Corps, soldiers who trudged through mud and snow to keep the lines alive. Over 2 million miles of wire, 6,000 miles every day. Each strand a lifeline, each connection a victory. History is not just about battles won, but about the threads that held everything together. And in the case of World War II, those threads were quite literal.